Need a ride? Lusy didn't hear. A deep sadness enveloped her. A feeling of hopelessness, shock at what had just transpired. Now, there was no turning back. The divorce had been long contemplated and expected. There was no room for forgiveness or reconciliation for the infidelity. No anger. It was a deliberate decision. It was a shame that 5 years ago, when Lusy entered these painful, humiliating relationships, she couldn't think as rationally. What was troubling her soul so much? Lusy. Need a ride? Oscar, now her ex-husband, had been standing nearby for several minutes. Yes, if it's not too much trouble. Can you give me a lift? Lusy replied. Well, that's good. You had such a dejected look, as if it were the end of the world, he remarked. In a way, it is, Lusy said as she sat in the car, and tears started flowing, almost unbidden. She pitied herself. She felt the loneliness of the past years, the desperation of unfulfilled hopes. Oscar thought Lusy was crying because she had lost his love and couldn't imagine life without him. She loved him deeply. Other reasons for her tears never crossed his mind. He was used to thinking of himself as an irresistible man, and no woman could survive a breakup with him. It was true. For some reason, women fell for him deeply and for a long time. If he decided a woman was his, it became true. None could resist him. The same thing happened with Lusy. There was no love at first sight, no sparks. He was of average height, with an ordinary appearance. Lusy thought he wasn't very smart. His self-esteem was incredibly high, with no doubt about his irresistible charm, essentially a narcissist. Lusy liked him. He straightened up and began to make an impression. Lusy laughed at him. In the end, she flat out told him that she never liked men like him. Don't bother pursuing me. You're wasting your time, she had said. She still couldn't explain to herself how she had fallen madly in love with Oscar. She couldn't breathe or live without him. She went to sleep and woke up with thoughts of him. It was as if she, Lusy, didn't exist. She had dissolved into Oscar. If he wasn't around, she wasn't alive. She seemed to be walking around in a daze, doing things, but she wouldn't wake up until he appeared and snapped his fingers. She knew it wasn't normal, it wasn't love. It was some kind of madness, but she couldn't do anything about it. It was pure happiness. Oscar was there, and nothing else mattered. In the first years of their life together, Lusy's constant thought was, I can't live without him. She felt as if she thought about it all the time, even in her dreams. Oscar, too, seemed content. But he lived his own life. He could say he was tired and needed a break, disappearing for several days. Lusy didn't allow herself to think about where he was going. She pushed away her suspicions, ignored her friends' hints, sometimes on the verge of gossip. She didn't want to think about it because she feared it would bring sadness back. Oscar seemed to think that life was boring without emotions. Maybe he got tired of the peaceful life and wanted to shake up Lusy, who had become stuck in her love. What he did was beyond rational explanation. When Oscar returned from his trip, he seemed excited, in high spirits. He made jokes, kissed and hugged Lusy continuously. But at the same time, he looked at her with a cunning expression, as if he had prepared a surprise but the time wasn't right. Lusy didn't notice anything strange. Her beloved Oscar had returned. Whatever he was doing, the most important thing was that he was home. She looked at him with the eyes of love and was happy. Oscar waited for her to finish speaking. Then, with a calm tone, as if he was talking about the weather, he said, Lusy, you're a smart woman. You'll understand me. I've fallen madly in love. I never thought it could happen. Don't worry. I'm not leaving you. You're my wife. A good wife. You love me. So, I'll stay with you. I think you'll appreciate my sacrifice and be grateful I chose you. I don't understand. Something happened to you, Lusy asked. Nothing happened to you. Oscar was puzzled. He expected tears, hysterics. Lusy's calm voice irritated him. You don't understand what I'm saying. I'm giving up the woman I love for you. Do you appreciate that? No. If you don't care, then I'm doing this for nothing. Another woman in your place would be grateful that I didn't leave her. But you're reacting strangely. You really don't understand what I'm sacrificing for you." Lusy couldn't comprehend or appreciate anything. She didn't understand what was happening, whether he was leaving or staying, or if she was even alive. Her heart stopped. The thought, "I can't live without him," echoed loudly in her mind. Why did he tell her this? Why didn't he keep silent if he didn't intend to leave? She looked at Oscar. Why is it acceptable to treat loved ones this way? You can do anything for a stranger to appear noble, but with loved ones, it's unfair. Honestly, he doesn't even try to hide it. He came and told me everything. Doesn't he realize how painful this is? He knows I can't escape from him. In his eyes, it's clear. Nowhere to go. You're foolish. You won't leave me. You'll love and serve me, just so I won't leave. Lusy tried to think of his infidelity. What does infidelity have to do with this? He's still with her. Oscar, my beloved. Just don't leave, just be with me. Nothing else matters. You have no idea what else I can think about. She pushed herself to a nervous breakdown, nearly ending up in the hospital. Oscar smiled. Everything had gone according to his plan. Rose, Lucy's friend, couldn't reach her by phone. She was getting worried. She had long understood who Oscar was. It struck her as strange that Lusy hadn't realized in all these years what kind of person she was living with. She had not seen the signs of infidelity, had not listened to her friends, and believed the lies her beloved has been told her. Waiting was no longer an option. Something had happened to Lusy. Entering her friend's apartment, she found a pale, lifeless girl wandering around, not understanding where she was or what was happening. "Tell me, what has your fool done this time?" Rose inquired. "Don't you dare talk about him that way. You know nothing. He's wonderful." "Of course. He's a wonderful, one-of-a-kind fool. How can you say that? He loves me. He sacrificed his own happiness for me." "You've gone completely insane." "Sacrificed? Isn't it you who are his love and happiness? It seems like it's you he sacrificed. How's he going to live now? Miserable, without happiness. I won't even ask what that scoundrel did this time." Through tears, Lusy began to tell Rose. Rose's eyes had the look of someone who was hearing an alien language, as if the person was speaking but she didn't understand a word. It was so incomprehensible that the human mind couldn't grasp it. "Rose, I forgave his infidelity. He realized I mean more to him. He came back to me. You're such a simpleton. What does infidelity have to do with it? He's been unfaithful to you from the very beginning. Don't act surprised. You knew it all along, you just chose not to notice. You don't notice anything at all. Are you really that foolish? You know I'm always on your side. I'd support you even if I disagree. But here, I just don't understand you. Let him cheat. Live with it if it doesn't disgust you. It's not about infidelity. It's cruelty. If you accept it now, he'll come up with something else." "Rose, how can you say such things? You know my Oscar. That's exactly why I'm saying it. Forgive me, my friend. I've congratulated you on all your holidays for so many years, wished you happiness, even though I didn't believe it. I've been waiting for some sort of deceit from your Oscar all this time. There have been so many deceits. You've been lucky. But only now are you finding out, and you still don't believe it. If I tell you now that you should leave him, you'll think I'm just jealous. I have no family of my own, so I decided to do something mean to you. I won't even ask whether you'll leave him or not. I know you won't. It's a pity, but someday you'll remember my words. For God's sake, don't think I don't wish you happiness. I just know that with Oscar, happiness won't happen. It will. Without him, I have no life. He's my soulmate. He's not your soulmate, Lusy. I'm sorry," Rose sighed sadly. "I'll go." Life continued. Lusy still lived with Oscar. She couldn't help but notice the changes, but pretended not to. Oscar's inner life remained known only to him. Perhaps he had genuinely realized his mistake. No, he hadn't. Things would have continued as they were if Oscar hadn't decided it was time for a new stage. He was getting bored. Lusy was on her way to work, already thinking about how she would meet Oscar in the evening. What delicious dish should I prepare for him? He loves fish. Lusy bought some salmon and headed back home, knowing she was running late for work. But she thought she would manage it, and at times like these, things tended to go awry. The door wouldn't open. The key didn't fit. It seemed like the lock was blocked from the other side, but it couldn't be. Lusy vividly remembered locking the apartment. Oscar was at work and wouldn't return until the evening. What was wrong with this lock? Lusy nervously fumbled with the key, knocking on the door. Suddenly, the lock turned, and the door opened. Oscar was blocking her path and asked, "Why did you come? Why aren't you at work?" "I'm here. With fish," she replied. "Fish? Well, come to the kitchen quickly," Oscar said, leading Lusy by the hand to the kitchen. He sat her down on a chair and told her to sit quietly and not leave the kitchen. She sat there, overhearing hushed conversations and laughter in the other room. Finally, the sound of high heels and the slamming of the front door. Silence. But where was Oscar? Had he left too? How could he leave when his weeping and humiliated wife was sitting here? Lusy walked into the kitchen. Oscar knelt in front of her, saying, "Lusy, I love you so much. Forgive me. You know that, besides you, nothing means anything to me. Let's not get divorced over something so trivial. Forgive me. Do you want to have a child? You wanted that, didn't you?" "Yes, I did. But now I suddenly imagine what kind of life that child would have. There won't be a father for sure. There will only be a nervous and hysterical mother." Lusy suddenly realized that if he continued to bring his lovers home, which he would, she would have to run away from this home, despite her love for him. She wasn't prepared for that kind of life. All of a sudden, she realized there was no love left. He had experimented on her, tested her resilience, and she hadn't passed the test. She had broke in. She looked at Oscar, as if thinking something, and then said coldly and firmly, "I hate you." The step from love to hatred had been taken. Lusy felt the full weight of the incredible change. She searched within herself for even a hint of her former love, which had sustained her for so many years. But all she found was unbridled hatred. Everything happened all at once. Overwhelming exhaustion, sleepless nights, nervous anticipation of humiliations. Most importantly, Lusy instantly realized there was no purpose in this life. Where was she going? What was she expecting? What lay ahead? It became frightening and terrifying. The thought crossed her mind. Did she even need this? Oscar seemed to not hear Lusy's "I hate you." His girl wasn't going anywhere. She was doomed to love him. Lusy was irritated by everything. Every little thing got on her nerves. A wrong look, a misunderstanding of her questions, a reply in the wrong tone, not revealing his whereabouts, showing up unexpectedly, and generally, just his presence was irritating. In the past, when Oscar was getting ready to go somewhere, she used to walk around the apartment, grab his hands, look into his eyes, and beg him not to leave. But now, she looked on indifferently. When the door closed behind him, she felt relieved, thinking, "Thank goodness. At least I'll live in peace. I hope he doesn't come back too soon." She stopped waiting, stopped welcoming him, and didn't prepare meals anymore. One day, she realized that she didn't even feel hatred. It was indifference. Maybe she should file for divorce, but she was so exhausted that she didn't want to think about it. Let it be as it is. Besides, Oscar seemed to have left completely, never to return. Rose couldn't believe that her friend had regained her composure and had forgotten that jerk. She advised her to file for divorce to keep that scoundrel at a distance. But Lusy responded indifferently. Later, "I have no strength." Oscar himself brought up the topic of divorce. For years, he had built the kind of relationship he wanted. Unquestioning obedience, blind, forgiving love, adoration bordering on fanaticism. He seemed to have gone too far, and Lusy, instead of crying or begging him to stay, acted strangely. She broke down. Oscar saw divorce as a threat to losing him forever, and he believed Lusy still loved him. He couldn't accept that she had fallen out of love. He didn't think it was possible. Lusy reacted to the news of the divorce with indifference, saying, 2 years without a divorce, and now what? Planning to marry someone else? Though it's none of my business. Yes, let's get divorced. I don't understand why you got married in the first place. What? You suddenly wanted a family? I'll never believe it. You should have just gotten a dog and trained it. Let's get divorced. I'm tired of it. I want to live on my own. You, on your own. That's not funny. What can you do on your own? Oscar retorted. Oscar, you won't succeed now. I'll sign the divorce papers. Find yourself someone else. And Oscar did find someone else fairly quickly. It was after the divorce, one evening, when the doorbell rang and Lusy opened the door. Of course, it was Oscar. He wouldn't let her forget. He came from time to time, thinking that she should still be under his control. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him was a woman who appeared to be 7 years older, short and plump. Her makeup was not neatly done, and her long brown hair was gathered in a messy bun. Miriam, come in, Oscar said. Oscar, I won't go in. Let me wait for you outside, Miriam replied. I said, come in. Miriam, come in. I don't know what he told you, but I'm not angry, Lusy said. What was this? A show of power, an attempt to provoke jealousy. Miriam stayed silent, avoiding eye contact, realizing the absurdity of the situation. Oscar brought a bottle of wine. Miriam objected quietly. Oscar, you know I don't drink. You have to, Miriam. After a glass of wine, Miriam poured her heart out to Lusy in the kitchen. She was indeed 7 years older than Oscar. She had 3 children from different husbands. But happiness had eluded her. She had stopped paying attention to her personal life. And then Oscar appeared, and she fell in love with him madly, just like Lusy once did. But explaining to her that it wasn't fate but trouble was impossible. A few moments of happiness would come at a cost. Pain, humiliation, and a loss of self. Miriam wouldn't listen. Foreign experiences don't teach. Only personal ones do. Fortunately, she had children. Maybe they would help her see reason. Indeed, Oscar, as Rose had said, was an extraordinary scoundrel. Why had he chosen this modest woman? Although it was clear that Lusy had left, he needed to feel absolute power, unconditional submission to his will. For this purpose, Miriam was a sure bet. She was ready to serve him unquestionably. Lusy wanted to shake some sense into her, to make her come to her senses, but it wouldn't help. Miriam was doomed. Oscar continued to visit her, to control where she was and with whom. He couldn't let Lusy make her own decisions. Her indifference humiliated him. She had chosen to live without him, so he told her, so, you've decided you can live without me. You don't want to see me. You don't listen to advice. You've become suddenly independent. Well, fine, my independent woman. But don't forget, you're living in my apartment. I left, of course, but did you think I'd leave you the apartment out of the goodness of my heart? So be independent all the way and think about where you'll live. Life is unpredictable. When Lusy married Oscar, she moved into his apartment from the university dormitory. Her love for Oscar had blinded her to the point where she considered this house her own. But note, Lusy, this is not your home. Did you want independence? Well, here you go. Oscar left. Lusy realized there was nowhere to go. Her mind was blank, completely empty. She sat and stared at her phone. Maybe she should call Rose. Rose might not be able to solve everything, but she would at least listen. According to their long-standing university code, if a friend calls, you drop everything and rush to their aid. It could be a crazy love affair, a broken heart, or even a life crisis. They had been friends since the beginning of university, but Rose knew very little about Lusy's family. She knew that Lusy lived with her grandmother, and Lusy had mentioned that her parents were gone, but she didn't go into detail. Lusy was crying, and Rose tried to comfort her. That scoundrel ruined the girl's life, and now he's kicking her out of her own home. He knows she has nowhere to go. By the way, how is this even possible? Lusy, you've always been so silent. And to be honest, I didn't want to ask too many questions, and I wasn't all that interested. Why were you living in a dormitory if you're from the city? What happened to your apartment? Lusy cried about her unhappy life. It was melancholic. Her heart felt heavy, and she told Rose everything she hadn't wanted to remember for many years. Her childhood had been happy, though Lusy didn't realize it back then. She lived with her mom, dad, and grandmother, whom they visited every summer in the countryside. She used to run to the lake for a swim and pick berries with her grandmother. Her parents came every weekend, and Lusy eagerly awaited their arrival, standing by the road, watching for their car. The joy was immeasurable when her mom and dad finally arrived. She would jump into the car and share all the countryside news with her parents on the way to her grandmother's house. But one day, her parents didn't come. She stood there, watching and waiting for them. It wasn't morning anymore, but she kept waiting. Eventually, her grandmother came and took her inside. Lusy, they couldn't make it today. They had some business. Don't cry. If they didn't come today, they'll come tomorrow. But they didn't come the next day or the day after. 2 days later, the police arrived and informed Lusy that her parents were in intensive care. As for Aunt Clara, who had been with them in the car, she didn't survive. Aunt Clara was her mom's relative, and they had come from a small town to visit the big city. Why not? They had relatives in the big city, and they had never ventured out of their small town. On that fateful day, they were on their way to Lusy. Nobody could remember what happened on the road afterward. Aunt Clara was busy with her husband's funeral arrangements. Lusy and her grandmother were glued to the doors of the ICU. But no miracle happened. Her dad passed away a week later. Her mom survived but was transferred to a hospital room. Her physical injuries healed to some extent, but she had clear mental problems. The loss of her husband had a devastating effect on her, making her appear mentally unstable. Lusy would visit her with her grandmother's hope that seeing her daughter would bring some relief, perhaps make her recognize her daughter. But there were no emotions whatsoever. Clara quickly grasped the situation and went to Mary, Lusy's mother, saying, "Mary, I want justice. Because of you, my husband died, leaving me alone. I can't leave him here in the cemetery. I will take you to court, and you will pay me alimony for life, plus damages for mental distress. So, give me the apartment. Don't worry, I won't kick Lusy out. Let her live with me, finish school. As for you, go live with your mom in the village. If you disagree, I'll strip you of your parental rights and apply for custody of Lusy. Anyway, the apartment will be mine." It's unclear if Mary was frightened or indifferent, but she handed over the apartment. Then she disappeared, never returned to her mother's, and no one ever saw her again. Lusy didn't stay with Clara for long. As it turned out, a city-dwelling, unmarried lady with her apartment was a recipe for chaos. Drunk men frequently appeared in the apartment, along with parties and fights becoming the norm. The neighbors tried to pass by her apartment as quickly as possible. Firstly, they could easily find themselves in the middle of a scandal or a brawl. Secondly, the stairwell reeked of garbage, and there was a strong smell of alcohol. People felt sorry for the little girl living there. How could she survive in such a place? The police knew this address by heart. Lusy's grandmother gathered the necessary documents to apply for custody, as her granddaughter would otherwise end up in an orphanage. Her mother was never found. Lusy finished school in the village and then entered college in the big city. When Lusy was in her second year of college, her grandmother passed away. Another year later, Oscar came into her life. It seemed like happiness was finally within reach. If someone had told Lusy back then what her life would be like in a few years, she wouldn't have believed it. And now, she sat with her friend Rose, wondering what to do. Okay, pack your bags, and you're coming with me. You can't stay here. Let that fool come tomorrow. But you won't be here. Rose, why come to your place? You don't have a stable life either, and I'll only mess it up for you. We're going now. We'll figure it out later. Let him take this apartment. The main thing is you shouldn't go anywhere else, just away from him. He won't even have a place to come and insult you. If he shows up here, I'll call the police. But I can't live at your place. What's this talk about? I'm living there just fine, and you can too. Plus, I'm not asking you to move in permanently. Let's calm down, think things through, and we'll come up with something. Stop crying. Get ready. It won't get worse. Rose convinced Lusy, quickly packed her bags, and vacated the apartment. Now they needed to think about what to do next. Lusy considered and decided, Rose, I'll go to my grandmother's house. Why not? It's a good house. I don't think there will be any big problems. Where will you live? And how will you work? There are no advertising agencies there. I have my own agency, and I'll just work from home. Many people do that. It's a start, and we'll see how it goes. You make it all sound so simple. You've been away from the village for a long time. Are you sure this is the right decision? After Oscar, I can handle anything. You know, I like your attitude. Though I wouldn't recommend moving to the village. But on the other hand, Oscar won't be able to reach you there. It's a fresh start. Are you ready? I'm ready. Once I've decided, I have to try. Lucy's grandmother's village was not far away, but it was inconvenient to reach. There were no direct routes. From the city, you had to get to the Red Hill bus stop. And from there, a bus to the Lake George village passed through in about half an hour. Lusy stood at the bus stop for almost 14 minutes, but the bus still hadn't arrived. Across the road, on the other side of the highway, near a roadside cafe, a group of men sat at a table. They had been looking at Lusy with interest for a while. One of the men approached her. Beautiful, why are you standing here alone? Come join us. No, thank you. Am I not to your liking? Look how handsome I am. Of course, you're handsome. But I'm not interested. Why aren't you interested? Well, I'm just not interested in strange strangers. What? Did you just call me strange? I meant to say that you don't interest me. The man gave Lusy a stern look and went back across the road to his friends. They were waving their hands, clearly discussing something animatedly. Lusy urgently searched for an escape. Where could she go? She was standing alone in the middle of the road. A truck pulled over nearby. The driver, a young guy, got out of the truck's cabin and walked across the road. He bought a bottle of water from the cafe and rushed back. Lusy ran to the truck. Please, take me with you. The guy looked at Lusy, noticed those men, and said, Quick, get into the truck's cabin. Lusy tossed her bag inside, climbed up the high steps, and sat in the passenger seat. The men were shouting something at her, probably not compliments, but Lusy couldn't hear them anymore. You've chosen a strange place to stand, or what were you doing here? The bus to the village stops here. I was waiting, but it never came. I saw your bus. It's broken down about 5 kilometers from here. So, you're lucky I felt like buying some water. I'm Steve, by the way. And what's your name? Lusy. Thank you, Steve. You're welcome. I kind of feel like a hero, a rescuer. I've saved a girl from the clutches of villains. Now you should name your future son Steve, just like in the movies. No problem. Where are you headed? Lake George. I know the place. But I can't take you all the way to the village. I'm running behind schedule. I'll drop you off at the intersection. I'll show you where to drop me off. It's closer to the village through the woods. During the ride, Lusy learned a lot about her rescuer. Steve was 23 years old, lived in the city, attended university, and worked for a transportation company. When asked why she was going to her old grandmother's house, Lusy didn't respond. Lusy walked through the forest, listening to the rustling of leaves, basking in the sun's warmth. All of this lifted her spirits, and she whispered to herself, Now everything will be fine. Here, nobody will harm you. It's over, Lusy, all your misfortunes. Lusy understood that the changes in her life couldn't be described as happy, but in her heart, she felt pure joy. There was no need to dwell on the past, no need to make any wishes. Let life go on as it does. The most important thing was to remember the feeling of happiness in the sunny forest. It would help her. The village was quiet, as one would expect on a hot day. Everyone stayed indoors, seeking shelter from the heat. Lusy believed she remained unnoticed. But in a small village, no new person goes unnoticed. The arrival of a newcomer is always noted. Her grandmother's house looked quite decent, with only a bit of paint peeling off the fence due to rain and wind. Nevertheless, it was clear that no one had lived in the house for a while. After her grandmother passed away, Monty, the mixed-breed dog, had been taken in by a neighbor. It was Matilda. Lusy entered the yard, which had become overgrown with many large weeds, almost choking her grandmother's beloved rose bushes and hydrangeas. Through the tangle of weeds, bright patches of blossoms were still visible. The key to the house was in the usual place, above the door. The lock opened easily, and Lusy stepped inside the house she loved and remembered. It was cool and dry inside, as if Aunt Ashley had been airing the place for all these years, with only a faint scent of dust. Lusy sat at the table, gazing at her reflection in the dusty mirror. In the mirror, she saw a woman with a tired, gray face and a dull gaze. The feeling of happiness suddenly vanished. The house was dusty, dirty, empty, and lonely. Where should she start? Probably by cleaning away the dust and dirt. When you begin cleaning, it often clears your thoughts. Come on, Lusy, let's get to it, she encouraged herself. Lusy ran her hand across the mirror. There, her gaze became more purposeful. If I clean the entire house, perhaps my thoughts will clear as well. Well, even if they don't, at least I'll be living in a clean home. Lusy was so angry with her fate, or rather with herself for how she had arranged her life, that in just 3 hours, she scrubbed away all the dust and dirt. She sat on the freshly cleaned, damp floor and realized she could hardly move anymore. Hey, who's here? Aunt Ashley stood at the doorway. She had aged a bit but was still beautiful, with young, bright eyes. Oh, my God, a familiar face. Lusy welled up with tears of joy. She had thought she was no longer needed. Here was Aunt Ashley, and somewhere along the highway, there was her savior, Steve. As long as someone remembers you, you're not alone. Yes, nerves were frazzled. She needed to pull herself together. Otherwise, she might need therapy. Lusy, is that you? Yes, Aunt Ashley. It's me. I thought you had sold the house. It's been so many years since you last visited. I've been waiting for the new owners to come, and here you are. Are you alone? Didn't you get married? I was married. Didn't like it. I decided I can do without it. And rightly so. Why do we, beautiful women, need bad husbands? If they don't measure up, make way for someone worthy. Lusy laughed sincerely. Oh, Aunt Ashley, did you forgive you were the one? Lusy knew Aunt Ashley's story. The whole village did for over 40 years. 16-year-old Ashley and Peter, who was a year older, loved each other deeply. They were looking forward to finishing school so they could get married. All the girls envied Ashley. Everyone wanted such devoted love. The boys tried to win Ashley away from Peter, but it was in vain. These two loved only each other. Peter dreamed of becoming a military pilot, and after finishing school, he went to New York and entered aviation college. Ashley didn't understand. What about me? I still have a year of school left. Ashley, I got into the college of my dreams. You'll finish school, come to me, and we'll get married. We didn't dream of this. You're leaving me. In the city, you won't even remember me. Ashley, it's just 1 year. But my dream will come true, and I'll become a pilot. Your dream will come true, but it seems mine won't. Either you stay or forget about me. You can't be serious. I got into the school I've always wanted. Don't you want your husband to be a pilot? I don't want any pilot. I want you here, with me. Peter left, and Ashley didn't forgive him. Then, years later, she realized that her foolish decision had ruined her life and her love for the pilot, Peter Phillips. In spite of Peter, she quickly married a local mechanic, Arnold, had a daughter, lived with him for a year, and then they separated. She was unhappy with an unloved, drinking husband. Peter visited, but Ashley didn't want to see him. She couldn't admit it to herself, but she was ashamed. Upon retiring at the age of 40, Pete returned to the village and spent many years trying to win Ashley's favor. The whole village supported Peter. They tried to convince Ashley and reason with her, but she couldn't be convinced. She knew she was at fault and had nothing to blame Peter for. Nobody understood, but she felt embarrassed to admit at the age of 60 that Peter was her only love, and becoming a bride at that age seemed foolish. Yes, Lusy, you can laugh, but Peter is still my love. I haven't told anyone in the village. I want to, but I keep quiet. I guess I'll surrender. What is there to be afraid of anymore? How much time is left? Whenever I think that I'll never know what it's like to live with my love, I get scared. But I'm really afraid to tell him. I'm the one who's at fault. What about me? I'll help you, though I think as soon as I start talking to him about this, he'll come to you on his own. All right, you can talk to him later. I see you've tidied up here, and the house is cozier. Turn on the fridge. I'll bring you something to eat. You must be hungry. As in Ashley hadn't mentioned food yet, Lusy didn't realize how much she wanted to eat. It turned out she was quite hungry. Oh, and Ashley, I'll go to the store now. Well, you go, and I'll bring you something to eat. Lusy walked through the village and marveled at how everything had changed. There were ordinary village houses, some well kept and beautiful, others poor and old. And in between them was a house that looked like a castle, albeit unfinished. Maybe we should consider selling it. No. How can I sell Grandma's house? It saved her. At the store, behind the counter, stood Lucy's classmate Francine. Lusy recognized her immediately. With those cheerful eyes and shiny black curls, there couldn't be anyone else. Hugs, tears, and kisses ensued. After all the hugging and kissing, Francine suddenly remembered that Lusy needed something from the store. What are you buying? Well, I have absolutely nothing. In that case, flour, eggs, butter, pasta, and rice. There are no vegetables, but I'll bring you potatoes, onions, and carrots tomorrow. I have them. I grow them. Francine, could you give me something to eat right now? I'm really hungry. Here are some canned goods, tomato soup. Take some cheese and bread. I still have 2 tomatoes. You can make a sandwich. Tomato soup and a sandwich. A dream. Thank you, my friend. So, are you back or just visiting? I don't know myself, but I'll stay for a while. How about you? I'll come by tomorrow, and we can patch up. When Lusy returned home, she found a basket on the doorstep with a bottle of milk and 2 slices of pie. One with chicken, the other with apples. Lusy opened the can of tomato soup and ate it right from the can. It tasted like her college days. In her married life with Oscar, this was unthinkable. No canned goods, no processed foods, only freshly cooked meals. Yesterday's soup was a reason for a quarrel. Lusy had never eaten anything tastier than this tomato soup. Well, it's time to sleep. Lusy turned off the light, but she didn't go to the bedroom. It felt a bit eerie in the empty house. She sat down at the table. The moon was shining through the window. Deafening silence enveloped her, as if there were no village, no people, nothing beyond the walls of her house, just Lusy. Plus, there was this tomato soup that reminded her of Oscar. I shouldn't think about him, forget about him. But how can I forget when I still think about every word, every action, what Oscar would have said? After her parents' death, Lusy had been so afraid of loneliness that she endured Clara. After her grandmother's death, loneliness became unbearable, and she entered into a relationship with Oscar. She tried to be with someone, just not to be alone. So much suffering and humiliation, and the result was the same loneliness. I feel so sorry for myself. So foolish. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. How could I have lived such a pathetic life? Why didn't I listen to anyone? Look at it from the outside. I didn't see the humiliated, weak woman. Lusy cried. She couldn't catch her breath, and she felt like she was on the verge of a breakdown. Well, I have the right to cry. No one will hear me. She cried from the depths of her soul, loudly and in a loud voice. Lord, why me? I don't want to know anything about them. What am I guilty of? Why does it hurt so much? I don't want anything, nothing at all. I don't want to live. Why is this happening to me? Lusy cried and couldn't stop, and in her mind, she thought, just a little more crying, a little more, and it will get easier, and I'll calm down. With tears, the pain of recent years began to dissipate. She cried all the way until dawn, but then strange sounds startled her. Right outside the door, there was a scraping sound, silence, and then someone was scratching again. Again, that scraping. What is it? Lord, it's so scary. Lusy heard footsteps. Someone was walking along the wall. A silhouette passed by the window, turned the corner, and silence. Who's walking here? And what's that scraping? Lusy didn't go to sleep after that. She sat there, listening and looking. Her frightened mind painted a horrifying picture. Lusy shrank in fear and sat on the chair until dawn. But nothing else happened. In the morning, she went to Aunt Ashley. Someone was walking around the property last night. I didn't want to scare you, but I've noticed it myself, that someone's been wandering around. They didn't break into the house, did they? Go home now. Don't worry. These ghosts only come out at night. I'll call the police, let them come and check. Go and try to get some sleep. Even a little, you look like a ghost yourself. Our policemen are young and handsome. You can't appear before them in this state. That's really funny. Well, who knows? A sleepless night, fears, and crying had exhausted Lusy, and she fell asleep. She had a dream about her grandmother. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling and stroking Lusy's hand. For some reason, her grandmother's hand was wet. Lusy was surprised and woke up. Her hand was wet, and there was a big red dog sitting by the bed. Monty. Lusy jumped out of bed, sat on the floor, and hugged the dog. Monty, you're still alive. How could I forget about you? Lusy, are you home? Oh, Matilda, she's been waiting for you. You see, she lives with Peter on the other side of the village. But she often runs to this house to check if her owners have returned. Finally, her doggy Happiness has come. A young man, around 30 years old, stood at the door. Lusy immediately thought he was a policeman. And Ashley had already described him as young and handsome. Montgomery Goldberry, I'm your policeman. Who you are? I've already figured out, thanks to Matilda. Why do you call her Matilda? Everyone calls her Monty, because our names are similar. When someone calls the dog Monty, I turn around. A few times, I even answered, I'm here. So Monty is me, and she is Matilda. Tell me what happened to you last night. Explaining a nightmarish situation when it's a bright day outside, and everything seems strange but not scary. Someone was walking around the property, but they didn't try to break into the house or peek through the windows. They just walked by. The scraping noise concerned Lusy the most. What could it have been? The door was made of wood. The porch was paved with stone. There was no metal involved. Montgomery went out to the porch, looked around, went down the steps, took a few steps on the path, sat down, and carefully examined something in the grass. Then he turned to Lusy. Go inside, lock the door, and listen. Then tell me if it sounds similar. Lusy stood behind the door and heard the scraping, followed by some kind of thud. That's exactly what she had heard during the night. She stepped out onto the porch and saw Montgomery with yesterday's can from the tomato soup in his hand. I can't say for sure who took your can. Maybe it was a cat. The can is heavy, and that's how it carried it as best it could. It was quite amusing, and Lusy felt a bit embarrassed. A real scaredy cat. It's not a crime. If you don't mind, I won't document it. But with the one who enjoys nighttime strolls on other people's properties, we'll take it seriously. Incidents requiring police intervention rarely occurred in the village. There were family disputes, fights, teenagers who shouted at the cottage owner, and in retaliation, they tore down the gazebo they had just built the previous night. The occasional theft also happened: a sack of animal feed from a farm, or sausage from a processing plant. Local farmers didn't report such criminals to the police. They dealt with it themselves. They either forgave some, fined others, or even fired them. 2 years ago, a businessman bought an abandoned house with a plot of land. His name was Mailers, and no one knew much about him. Rumors were circulating. Some claimed he was a gold industrialist, while others said he was involved in criminal activities. He built a luxurious 2-story house with verandas. On the property, he created flower beds with pathways and gazebos. He didn't live in the house, only occasionally visiting with his family for a week or two. He hired a retired neighbor's family to watch over the house and the property. They were more than happy. Where else would they earn extra money? However, Judith Welch, a neighbor from across the street, and a retired school teacher, was in a dispute with Mailers. While constructing his fence, he took 3 meters of land from her. At first, she tried to negotiate, as she didn't really need those 3 meters. If he had paid, they would have settled it amicably. But Mailers bluntly refused. Judith went to court and won. However, Mailers neither paid her nor moved the fence. 2 weeks ago, Mailers' house was burglarized. A large TV and an expensive lawnmower were stolen. For the village, it was a significant event. Nothing had been stolen from local houses before. If something went missing from someone's property, the entire village would know what had disappeared, who had taken it, and where it had gone within an hour. Today, a neighbor who looked after Mailers' property came to Montgomery. One of the house's windows had been neatly broken, but he didn't know if anything was missing. They had to wait for the owner. The house seemed orderly. So, Lusy, your nocturnal visitor may not be so simple after all. Did they want to rob the house? Well, that's unlikely. The house has been vacant for so many years. Why rob it now when the owner has returned? Most likely, they were walking closer through your property. But where were they headed? And what if they come again? I'm scared. Here's my business card. It has my phone number. My house is at the end of the street, right by the forest. You can call and come at any time. I'll find out where our nocturnal guest is going. About an hour later, Francine arrived with potatoes and carrots. Oh my, your place is so cozy. Did the policeman come to visit you? Are you just waking up now? Lusy looked in the mirror. What a nightmare. I didn't wash my face or fix my hair. I talked to Montgomery like this. He came here 3 years ago. After a year, he built a new house. Did you see his house? Tell me, how can an ordinary policeman afford such a house? Maybe he's a millionaire, playing policeman out of boredom. Listen, I'll go now, and then I'll come back, and we can chat. In the evening, as she lay down to sleep, Lusy reassured herself that there was nothing to fear. Montgomery had already assured her that no one would enter the house. And if anyone dared to roam around her property again, she had Monty sitting by the door now. She wouldn't stay silent this time. But she still couldn't sleep. She lay there, staring out of the window. Then, it happened again, quiet footsteps. A dark silhouette against the window. Lusy thought the stranger had stopped and glanced into the window, just for a moment. But he looked. What followed was sheer madness. The silhouette ran alongside the house, followed by another. Was he not alone? The rustling of bushes, some cries, maybe even a woman's scream. Lusy rushed out onto the porch. What had possessed her? Her legs trembled with fear. She stumbled over Monty, who, for some reason, wasn't barking but sitting calmly on the porch. Such a protector. They're attacking the owner, and she's just sitting there, not even barking. Does she know everyone who comes around here? Lusy peered around the corner, no one. She cautiously walked along the house, reached the bushes, and stopped. She couldn't go into the bushes. Her heart was already pounding. Then something big and terrifying emerged from the bushes. Lusy screamed, and the stranger grabbed her and screamed as well. "Quiet! It's me, Montgomery. Where were you going?" This isn't a Hollywood thriller where you have to search for the one who came to kill you with a flashlight. "Let's go inside." Lusy sat, attempting to drink some tea, but her body was shaking. "What was that?" "I don't know. I went after the person who was on your property. Then I tried to grab them, and someone kicked me. I fell, and they ran away. But I'm sure it was a woman." "Did you notice that Monty didn't bark? That means they're familiar. Are you planning to spend the night alone?" "Oh no, I'm terrified." "Then let's go to my place. Enough adventures for today." "Yes, let's." "Oh, just don't think I." "Don't worry, I hardly ever think." "Get ready." The police officer had a strange house. 2 stories, a hallway, a living room, and a dining room on the first floor. 2 bedrooms and a billiard room on the second. Nothing strange inside the house. A very nice businessman's house. It was odd that it belonged to a rural police officer. "You don't look like a cop." "What do I look like?" "More like a businessman or an artist. There's a certain polish about you." "How did you end up with a house like this?" "It was a gift from my dad." "Who's our dad?" "Wait, Goldberry. Abraham Goldberry, your father." "Yes, that's how it happened. The utterly untalented son of the great musician Abraham Goldberry." Abraham Goldberry was a talented, no, a genius pianist. A laureate of all possible competitions. The world's best concert halls were queuing up to organize his performances. His touring schedule was planned years in advance. Montgomery knew from childhood that he would become a musician. There was no other path with a father like that. As he grew older, he realized that he could never measure up to his father. He was a decent pianist, but not on the same level. He didn't even want to be second fiddle, he wanted to be something other than just part of the crowd. To receive sympathetic looks, like no matter how hard his dad tries to help his son's career, it's all in vain. To hear whispers behind his back, when there's no talent, not even a famous dad can save you, was unbearable. Abraham Goldberry believed that there was no other purpose in life but to serve art. Montgomery Goldberry adored his father, admired his talent, but he decided he needed to find his own path, not follow in his father's footsteps. He told his parents he wanted to become a lawyer, enrolled in college, and moved out of his parents' house. His father couldn't understand how he could abandon a career as a pianist for a legal office. But he didn't pressure his son. Montgomery graduated from college, and his father, using his connections, started arranging lucrative positions for him. At first, Montgomery tried to explain to his father that he didn't need those positions. Then he got angry and demanded that his father stay out of his life. Goldberry Sr. was deeply hurt. Goldberry Jr. asked his superiors to send him anywhere, as far away from New York as possible. They were surprised but complied, especially since there were no other candidates for the police officer position in Lake George. "So, you had a falling out with your father and left the house. That makes sense." A couple of months later, my father came to make amends, saw the house I was living in, and offered to build me a new one, since I was being so stubborn. I declined. Then my father had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital. That's when my mother came and told me that if I didn't accept the house as a gift, my father would die and she would curse me. What choice did I have? Now I have a house, and my father insists on helping me with money. I can't afford this house with my salary. Don't you want the house and the money? I don't want to be indebted. No, that's not right. You don't know how to be grateful. They're your parents, and they want you to live well. They have the means to help, and you've got these hang-ups in your head, and you're willing to fight with your parents just to avoid feeling indebted. I think they're proud of you. Don't obstruct their sense of being needed. They might not like your decision, but they accepted it. If my parents were still alive, I'd never fight with them. Never say anything against them. You can't imagine how lucky you are to have loving people around you. And the fact that they are successful and famous is even more reason to be proud of your family. Enough of the sentimental talk. It's time to sleep. My bedroom is to the right. Yours is on the left. You'll figure it out. Lusy woke up in a sunlit room with bright walls, light curtains, and comfortable furniture. How could one not want to live in such a beautiful house? It might not be luxurious, but it was expensive, beautiful, and comfortable. Yes, it's good to be the son of a famous musician. But for girls without a job and personal problems, it's time to leave their little house. They provided shelter for the night, and I'm thankful, Lusy thought. Montgomery was nowhere to be seen. So Lusy quickly got ready and left the house. She briefly considered locking it, but Montgomery hadn't even left a key, let alone a note. Monty, her dog, was waiting for her outside, visibly agitated until his owner returned. The house was clean and cool. Why do we need rich guys' houses? We should settle in here, Lusy decided. Lusy spent the day productively, finally cooking a meal and tending to a few pink rose bushes. In the evening, she sat on the porch, tired but proud of herself. I can make this work. No one will make me cry anymore. Who was she saying this to? Probably to herself. Although she might have heard, she wouldn't tell anyone. A quiet rural life began, with no one visiting at night, perhaps due to Montgomery's presence. She was working remotely for an advertising agency. They weren't entirely pleased, but they transferred her to remote work. She's a good employee, and it's a shame to lose her, they thought. Lusy took on a few orders and worked peacefully. Montgomery occasionally visited, but Lusy met him with indifference, even though she liked him, which she couldn't show. Autumn arrived, golden and beautiful with bright sunshine. On the weekends, Rose came to visit. Lusy wanted to check on her friend's well-being. Rose seemed fine on the phone, but Lusy wanted to make sure she wasn't covering up her problems. Listen, country girl, how do you live here? Rose inquired. You won't believe it. I'm doing great. I don't believe it. How can you live without a movie theater, beauty salons? There isn't even a shopping center here. Where do you buy your clothes? I go to the city nearby, Lusy replied. Perfect. That's the life. Get ready. We're going to the city. You'll stay with me, Rose insisted. Rose, I'm not going. I like it here. All right. I brought all sorts of goodies. Let's sit, have some wine, and decide later. They sat, drank wine, reminisced about their college days, laughed, and cried. Suddenly, they heard commotion outside, shouting and footsteps. They sat in silence in the dark, too exhausted to move. Lusy rushed to the door when the noise continued, but she was stopped. Stay put. Let's wait a little longer, Rose advised. What is going on? Rose whispered. You can't stay here. You're coming with me tonight. I'm going to the city, Steve whispered. I'll take you with me. The noise at the door persisted. Lusy, it's Montgomery. Open up. Lusy hurried to the door and opened it. Montgomery entered, accompanied by a person in a hooded coat. Pushing the stranger into the room, he said, Here's your nightmare. You'll be very surprised. Hello, I didn't know we had guests. He removed the hood from the person's head, revealing shiny black locks. Francine. Lusy sat on the table, baffled. No, it's not Francine. What's she doing on your property, and why scare her? Rose and Steve were completely bewildered. Who was this woman, and why was she brought here? Who was Montgomery? Lusy could only explain who Montgomery was. She didn't understand the rest herself. Montgomery ordered Francine to sit on a chair and instructed her to tell the whole story from beginning to end. But what's there to tell? Just an ordinary case of infidelity. Francine, a bright young woman, had no shortage of suitors. However, her love had blossomed not with a local guy, but with an outsider, a construction worker named Tomas. 6 months of unparalleled passion and dreams of a happy family life followed. But the local tough guys couldn't allow him to take away the brightest girl. They found the local guy one night by the lake with a knife wound. Everyone knew he had constant disputes with Tomas over Francine. What had really happened? No one knew, but Tomas was convicted, and he went to prison. 2 years later, Francine married a cattle rancher, and a couple of years after that, Tomas was released. He came for Francine, but he never appeared in the village. He lived in a hunting cabin. Francine visited him almost every night. "Why did they cross my property?" "Because your house is the closest to the bridge across the lake." Going around would add an extra half hour. The house was empty, and no one could see them. It was convenient. "Why didn't you get a divorce from your husband?" Is he oblivious to the fact that his wife doesn't spend her nights at home? He sees it, but he loves me so much that I can't leave. Well, that's some high-level relationship. So, what are we going to do now, Montgomery? Do you have any thoughts? I do, but they're all insincere. You, Francine, go. Francine left, and everyone fell silent. Rose decided to break the tension. "Montgomery, I figured it out. You're a cop." "That's correct. You just solved a crime. I merely uncovered infidelity." "No, you've relieved this girl of her nightly nightmares." They sat together until midnight. They were relatively unfamiliar, except for Lusy and Rose, but they made a great company. When Rose tried to convince Lusy to leave with her, Montgomery looked concerned. When Lusy tried to persuade Rose not to go to the city at night and stay over, Steve started to worry. In the end, Rose left with Steve, and Lusy remained with Montgomery. "Montgomery, we figured out who was trespassing on my property." "How does this relate to the burglaries at the mailers?" "It doesn't. These are two entirely different matters. I'll explain later. I haven't figured it all out myself yet." Autumn ceased to be beautiful and golden. Rain poured all day, making everything wet and muddy. Lusy immersed herself in work. What else could she do in such weather? Occasionally, Montgomery visited, but their conversations were shallow. She didn't allow herself to get carried away with him. Why set herself up for disappointment? Clearly, the boy, born into wealth, the son of famous parents, couldn't consider rural life the culmination of his dreams. He'd play at independence for a while and then return to his father, and she wouldn't be included. What would happen to her then? Running away to the ends of the earth again, just like after Oscar. But there was nowhere left to run. The rain, the rain. Then one morning, she woke up to white snow outside. Well, that's good. Winter is coming. Lusy realized she was living strangely. She used to treasure every hour, but now she indifferently watched the days go by. It passed, and that was fine. It was as though she had 200 years of life ahead of her, with plenty of time for everything. Perhaps she didn't belong here, and she needed to return to the city. Or maybe it was because she didn't know how to live alone. About how she lived not alone, she soon had to remember very quickly. In early December, Oscar arrived. Seeing him on her doorstep, Lusy was taken aback, as if a ghost from the past had appeared. She wondered why he had come. It wasn't like he missed her. There was no doubt that his visit wouldn't bring any joy. "Hello, my dear." Lusy felt a shiver from his touch. Oscar hugged Lusy by the shoulders. "Let's go inside. It's cold." Once again, as if under a spell, she couldn't find the words to say. Oscar walked through the house, examining the surroundings with little interest, even a touch of disdain when he saw the old furniture. Then, after a prolonged pause, he gazed at Lusy. In the past, under such a gaze, she would start to recall her wrongdoings. But now, as she looked at his self-assured face, she suddenly understood why he had come. To ensure that she couldn't live without him, to test the extent of his control, and to bring back his runaway wife. She wondered, where had Miriam gone? It was unlikely that she had the strength to tear herself away from Oscar. More likely, she had dissolved so completely in him that he had become bored. Oscar was puzzled, for his authoritative gaze and theatrical pause didn't seem to have any effect. She sat there, silent, looking at him indifferently, devoid of any emotion, without excitement, joy, or worry, not even asking why he had come. "Lusy, I came for you. You've shown character. That's enough. You're not doing well on your own. Sometimes it's better to be alone. It's easier to start all over again if it works out. You won't make it." Oscar grew angry. "You don't know how to live on your own. Look at how you're living now. Is this a home? People don't live in such places. There's old junk instead of furniture, and you're sitting here alone. You'll go wild soon. Or do you hope to start a new life and find a new love? Don't hope. You won't be able to love anyone but me." And he was right. He had oppressed her with his unhealthy love for so long, so skillfully humiliated her, that now she couldn't love, and she was afraid. He didn't hesitate to travel so far just to once again explain to Lusy how insignificant she was. "Okay, I've heard it all. It's time for you to go. Otherwise, you won't get out of our hole. The roads aren't cleared in winter. So, you're kicking me out, are you? I came here to help you. Just consider that you've helped." Your passionate speeches cleared my mind. "Stop playing around." Oscar was already shouting. "Get ready. You're coming with me." Lusy was scared. Oscar had never allowed himself to yell like this before. He always perpetrated his mischief with a smile, observing with the curiosity of a researcher, never losing his composure. In the agency where Lusy worked, the young and creative employees used an infallible trick to avoid worrying about the boss. When they were summoned to the boss's office for a reprimand, they imagined some amusing little creature sitting on the boss's head. A mouse, a squirrel, a lizard. Firstly, you focused on this creature, and the boss thought you were gazing into his eyes with devoted attention. Secondly, you had no time left for fear. All your strength went into not bursting out laughing at the boss's face. Lusy imagined a small green frog sitting on Oscar's head. It bulged its eyes, inflated itself comically, and comically flailed its little legs. Oscar didn't understand what was happening. He glanced in the mirror, thinking, "No, everything seems fine. What the heck is going on? Do you hear what I'm saying? You're coming with me." Steps echoed on the porch. The door opened. "Lusy, what's all this noise?" Montgomery stood in the doorway. "Oh, I see," Oscar said, irritated. "Lusy, I get it now. You found yourself a oral lover. Well done, Lusy. But it won't work out for you." Oscar walked towards the door, casting a piercing, magnetic gaze at Montgomery, but Montgomery wasn't fazed. Then Oscar shoved Montgomery aside and burst onto the porch. "What was that?" Montgomery asked, bewildered. Lusy laughed. "My ex-husband. Oh my, he's so angry. And you're barely holding back your laughter." Lusy laughed and told Montgomery about the frog. "Well, you sure know how to entertain yourself." Montgomery came with a specific purpose, or rather a request, but he didn't know how to delicately explain it. His famous father, Abraham Goldberry, is returning to New York next week for a Jubilee celebration. He wants to mark the occasion in a grand way. The best restaurant has been rented, and a large society reception is expected, with many celebrities and officials in attendance. Montgomery couldn't afford to miss such an event. He's the only son of the magnificent musician. Montgomery, of course, doesn't really want to be there, but he can't hurt his father's feelings. Moreover, knowing his long-standing desire to see his son married, he is certain that suitable daughters of all the celebrities will be invited to the reception. Disappointing his mother with his absence is also not an option. She has put in so much effort. However, spending the entire evening smiling at someone's daughters and showering them with compliments is beyond his capabilities. So, he thought that if he doesn't go to the event alone, at least the daughter problem will be resolved. Now all that's left is to convince Lusy. "No, Montgomery, I don't want to go anywhere. Besides, I don't know how to behave, and I'm not accustomed to society events. Bringing an unfamiliar woman to my father's jubilee would be quite tactless. You'll have to explain why I've earned such an honor. What will you say?" Will you claim that I'm your fiancé and narrate a tale of otherworldly love? I doubt it. After all, my parents are intelligent people. They won't believe I fell in love so quickly, especially my mother. She's convinced that I'm incapable of love. It's beyond me. I'll tell them honestly that I'm coming with a good friend, a lovely and intelligent young lady. I'm sure they won't object. They're concerned that I don't let them into my life. Meeting someone from my circle will make them happy. So, am I your friend, then? Of course, aren't you? Don't worry. There's no royal protocol involved. They're just people who like to relax and have fun. So, please help me. I'll think about it. But if I agree, you must help me. I don't know how to behave, and even how to look the part. Will you explain it to me and not laugh at the country bumpkin? I promise. In a New York hotel room, Lusy stood in front of the mirror, scrutinizing herself critically. She liked how she looked, and even if she were to be very critical, she still looked good. When choosing her dress, she genuinely enjoyed herself. It felt like a scene from the movie Pretty Woman. Looking into the mirror, she saw a beautiful woman in a coffee and cream cocktail dress, with a stylish hairstyle she had never worn before, and shining eyes. She felt like a queen. There was a knock at the door. Montgomery, wow, a tuxedo, that's so chic. That's how Lusy imagined rural police officers. The restaurant was ablaze with lights. A Swiss concierge stood at the entrance, and a parade of increasingly luxurious cars arrived one after another. They just needed a red carpet. Other than that, it was full-on Hollywood. Lusy's legs trembled with fear. Montgomery helped her out of the car. Don't be afraid. The most important thing is to stay close to me. It will calm your nerves and keep me safe. We'll save each other. Montgomery, don't you dare laugh at me. I'm trembling from fear. Already, that's too soon. The most important part is yet to come. Sorry, I won't do it anymore. Relax. You're just here for dinner. You didn't come alone. I brought you, so I'm responsible for you. And besides, we're not the evening's heroes. We're not that interesting to anyone here. At the entrance to the hall stood Montgomery's parents. Lusy's breath caught in her throat. A world-renowned star shook her hand, looking at her with entirely human eyes. Such a kind man with a simple and friendly face. He looked more impressive on posters. Next to him stood a woman of extraordinary beauty. Yes, you're not a queen. She is. The formal part of the evening began. Congratulations, toasts, musical gifts. Lusy was constantly amazed. These are ministers. Oh my, that's the king of entertainment. And that's the world-famous conductor of the symphony orchestra. It's unlikely I'll ever have to attend such a reception again, but the memories will last a lifetime. Montgomery occasionally engaged in conversation with someone, offering a brief smile in response to greetings, and he seemed openly bored. Lusy was the subject of close scrutiny. However, she was fortunate not to notice, as she was completely absorbed in the events on the stage. After all the necessary pleasantries had been exchanged, Michelle Goldberry, Montgomery's mother, decided that social niceties had been observed, and she could finally embrace her beloved son. At the same time, she could assess the depth of Montgomery's relationship with Lusy. He had claimed that she was just an acquaintance, but she was quite an exceptional young woman. Modest, intelligent, and not that simple. Lusy, please excuse me. I'll take my son away for a short while. Montgomery looked at Lusy with concern. Lusy, don't worry. I'll be back quickly, he reassured her, and then he followed his mother. Montgomery, I've missed you so much. Are you staying for long? No, I'm leaving tomorrow. Tomorrow. But we haven't had a chance to talk, and your father didn't even get a chance to hug you. Will you come to our place for lunch tomorrow, so we can chat for a bit? Did you stay at a hotel? Perhaps you could stay the night at our place. No, Mom, Lusy won't be coming. Yes, Lusy. You know, I've been thinking all this time about who you choose. I realized I had no say in the matter, but your Lusy has made a good impression on me. She's a lovely girl. Mom, There's nothing between us. We're just acquaintances. I think there's something more between you. There's an old joke. A son brings 3 girls home and says to his mother, "Guess which one is my fiancée?" She points and says, "That one." He asks, "How did you know?" She replies, "I didn't like her from the start." I'm not saying that I didn't like Lusy. On the contrary, I'm pleasantly surprised. It's just that a mother's heart can't be deceived. Reluctantly, Lusy had to accept the invitation to lunch at the Goldberries. She didn't know how to behave or what to say. However, Michelle Goldberry, understanding the girl's state of mind, quickly took charge. It turns out that even famous people can be down to earth and warm, and you can have meaningful conversations and even share a few jokes with them. Lusy left, almost falling in love with Montgomery's parents. After the trip to New York, she could no longer lie to herself about her indifference to Montgomery. Yes, I like him, but what can I do? He still comes to chat, like with his best friend, to discuss village happenings. But there's been nothing more. One day before Christmas, Rose called. "I'm coming to your place. I want a country Christmas. I have excellent news. Are you getting married?" "What? Oh no. Wait for me, I'll tell you. By the way, does your policeman have a car? I bought a bus ticket, and they said it might not reach the village if the road is snowed in. They might drop me off at a crossroads. So please meet me by the highway, just in case." Lusy didn't get a chance to correct Rose about the policeman. Rose abruptly hung up. Christmas preparations were always enjoyable, even if you no longer believed in Santa Claus. Lusy asked Montgomery to bring a Christmas tree, and he said the tree was already in his living room, and they just needed to decorate it. "Lusy, why don't we pick up your friend and come straight to my place? You can decorate the tree and you'll have a Christmas feast with us. The food is already in the fridge." "No, we won't trust you to decorate the tree, and you've probably bought the wrong food. Let's go, I'll check." The fridge was filled with pies, pineapples, seafood, and red caviar. Clearly, it was a gift from the Goldberry family. They had potatoes and carrots, and the farmers promised to deliver the meat in an hour. In principle, there was enough, although Lusy wanted to find something to criticize. But there was nothing. When Rose saw the house they had brought her to, she was speechless. She walked around, examining it, then called Lusy into the kitchen and asked anxiously, "Who is he?" "A policeman." "Is this how our policemen live?" "Lusy, who is he?" "A gangster. Wasn't one fool enough for you? Do you want more adventures?" "Rose, he's not a gangster. He's the son of a very famous pianist. The house is a gift from him." "Does his father also live in this village? Does he give concerts here?" "Do you know who Abraham Goldberry is?" "Of course, who doesn't? Montgomery is his son." "Really? Come on. I know his parents. I've been to their house. He's definitely a Goldberry. I swear to you." Wow. When Rose finally recovered from this news, they began to plan their Christmas feast. Risotto with mussels and shrimp, calamari with pineapple. No, how about turkey and potato salad? That's what they needed. Pineapples and tangerines for dessert. Rose also promised to bake a lemon cake. While something was baking in the kitchen, they decorated the Christmas tree. Montgomery had a collection of Christmas ornaments from all over the world, gathered during his tours. Exquisite porcelain angels and butterflies, Chinese dragons and lotus flowers, woven balls. Lusy had never imagined that Christmas ornaments could be so incredibly beautiful. The tree turned out to be far from the latest fashion, with decorations of various colors and sizes, but it was incredibly beautiful. Lusy made a wish. It would come true, of course, as everything comes true on Christmas. Montgomery was on the phone with someone. Rose was talking about something, and Lusy wasn't really listening. She suddenly felt a bit melancholic. Then, her phone rang. At first, she was scared. For some reason, she thought it was Oscar calling. But no, it wasn't his number. "Lusy, it's Steve. Merry Christmas. How are you over there?" "Steve, Merry Christmas. I'm doing well. celebrating Christmas at Montgomery's. Rose has come, so we're having a great time. And the food is delicious. How about you? I'm fine, coming back to the city. I'll be home soon. Have a wonderful time. Goodbye for now. Neighbors started to arrive, each feeling it was their duty to congratulate the policeman. They drank, sang, and danced. Eventually, the neighbors left, turning off the lights, leaving only the Christmas tree shining brightly. It was warm, cozy, and festive. Montgomery said he needed to take a walk around the village. In reality, he wanted to leave the two friends alone. Rose didn't come all this way for nothing. She likely wanted to talk to Lusy. Rose decided to get it all out in the open immediately. Lusy, I'm pregnant. Oh my God. By whom? By Steven. Does he know? No. And there's no need for him to know. I'm not going to tell him. 23 years old. What's he going to do with a child? Moreover, it's from a 30-year-old woman. Maybe he's incredibly noble and might even marry me. But why would I ruin his life? I wanted this myself, and I got it myself. Let him live peacefully. If you dare to tell him, I'll curse you. I'm telling you because I can't keep it to myself. It's such a significant event, and I have no one to discuss it with. As soon as I found out I was pregnant, I broke up with Steven. Don't spill the beans, or he'll keep calling and calling. Lusy thought she had already spilled the beans. Steve was somewhere on the highway, and she had informed him of Rose's location. Now, they had to wait for Steve to visit, in case he couldn't reach Rose. Rose got married back in college and almost immediately got pregnant. However, she decided that she didn't need a child at the time and had an abortion. She later divorced her husband, and the child was likely not the reason. As she grew older, Rose really wanted a child, but it didn't happen. She had come to terms with the fact that some people live without children. But now, she was suddenly pregnant, and on top of that, it was from some young guy. She might tell him, but the result was predictable. Rose didn't care about how he would react. What was important to her was that she was going to have a child. Rose, you should still tell Steve. Oh, come on. Grown men get scared. What can you expect from a young guy? He's a perfectly grown man. When you slept with him, didn't he seem too unintelligent? So let him decide for himself who to live with and when to have children. If you don't tell him, I will. The issue isn't that he's young. It's that we're so different. I'm a strong woman, and he's calm and sensible. Psychologically, we're just different types. Wouldn't it be better to tell him if you love him? People get married for love, not because of psychological types. The sound of an engine, voices, and then Montgomery and Steve entered the house. Girls, look who I brought. Please welcome our guest. Lusy stood up from the table, hugged Steve, and then took Montgomery by the hand. Shall we go for a walk? I've already had enough. But you need to. The village was celebrating Christmas. A large group of people was coming to the gathering, singing loudly but not particularly in tune. Avoiding such a crowd was impossible. Montgomery and Lusy took each other's hands, drew each other into the center of the celebration, twirled around, and embraced. Lusy suddenly noticed Aunt Ashley and Peter, who were walking slightly to the side while holding hands. The festive atmosphere didn't bother them. They were clearly engrossed in their own conversation. The cheerful group continued to dance, leaving Montgomery and Lusy alone. In the house, the windows were lit up with festive lights. When they returned, the house was quiet. Rose and Steve were sitting beneath the Christmas tree, hugging each other. We've decided to get married. Seeing the question in Lusy's eyes, Steve whispered, I love her. What does it matter if she's older? It doesn't bother me. A Christmas miracle happened to someone that night, even though it wasn't Lusy. She suddenly felt a pang of disappointment. Why not her? The next day, Rose, who now seemed to have everything sorted out in her personal life and was almost a married lady, decided that it wouldn't hurt to help her friend as well. She wanted to ensure that only happy people surrounded Lusy. And when Rose made a decision, she took action immediately. So, why delay? It was clear that Lusy and Montgomery had feelings for each other. Lusy, tell me, what's going on between you and Montgomery? What's holding you back? It's obvious. Lusy understood. Montgomery had been living in the village for several years. He was respected, sought after for advice, and asked for help. But he didn't have friends. They were friends. He was a young, handsome, and wealthy man. But the local girls weren't interested in him. So, you want to know why Montgomery brought you to that party where you felt out of place? You think he's just dumb and didn't realize you're out of his league. Maybe he wanted them to know there's a Lusy, and it was time for them to accept his choice. I just think he brought a friend with him so that his parents wouldn't keep pestering him with questions about when he's going to get a girlfriend. But why you? He has so many acquaintances, and I'm sure they wouldn't refuse. Maybe he found it easier with me. No need to put on a show or make an impression. It was like coming with a friend. Well, and do you like this friend more than just a friend? Well, what's it to you? Yes, I like him. So what? Tell me again. Do you like this friend more than just a friend? Why do you keep pushing? Yes, I like him. But that's it. All right, what's wrong with that? Are you worried that he brought a friend like you? Is it a big deal? He's a friend to me. He came to chat, discuss local news. That's it. So, why are you going with him? Why complicate everything? Be happy that you met. It's not that simple. I went to New York with him, and there's no doubt we can't be together. We're from different worlds. I can't believe we even met. Why don't you tell me all the details about your alien then? Lusy told Rose everything in detail, sharing what she remembered from the glamorous reception, and again felt the emotion she had experienced there. She was out of place, uninteresting to everyone. Even though nobody was disrespectful or condescending, she felt that she was only tolerated because she came with Montgomery. Out of respect for the Goldberry family, lunch at the Goldberry house was also a struggle. Lusy was constantly afraid of saying the wrong thing, of appearing ignorant and uncultured. The trip to New York still stung, and she felt embarrassed and hurt. Did you ever wonder why Montgomery brought you to this party where you felt out of place? Or do you think he didn't know that you don't belong to that crowd? It was probably necessary. He wanted his parents to know that there was a Lusy, and it was time for them to accept his choice. Rose, I just went with him as a friend so that his parents wouldn't nag him about not having a girlfriend. But why you? He has so many acquaintances, and I'm sure none of them would refuse. Maybe he found it easier with me. No need to put on a show or make an impression. It was like coming with a friend. All right, but what's so good about that? I'm just his friend. I came to chat, discuss local news. That's it. If you're going with him, then you should be more than just a friend. Why do you care? Yes, I like him. But what does it matter? Well, if you like him, then there's hope for you. No, there's not. I went to New York with him, and there's no doubt we can't be together. We're from different worlds. It's strange that we even met. Let me help you out here. Why did he bring you to that party where you felt out of place? Didn't he know you wouldn't fit in? Or was he expecting you to get along? You know, he wanted to show you to his parents, and it's time for them to accept his choice. I just went with him as a friend, so his parents wouldn't pester him about not having a girlfriend. But why you? He has so many acquaintances, and I'm sure none of them would refuse. Maybe he found it easier with me. No need to put on a show or make an impression. It was like coming with a friend. But what's the point? I'm just his friend. I came to chat, discuss local news. That's it. Well, if you like him, then there's hope for you. Why do you care? Yes, I like him. But so what? All right, if you like him, then there's hope. Rose, I don't need your matchmaking skills. Rose sighed. Yes, it took some time, but I will make you happy, dear friend. Oh, Lusy, why are we so foolish? Well, you're smart now. The Christmas holidays came to an end. and Rose and Steve left. A couple of times, Montgomery had to intervene to calm down agitated men on the streets. There was even an attempt to bid farewell to this world. Fred, the village veterinarian and Francine's husband, had tried to leave this world. Francine swore that her husband hadn't intended to do it. It was just an accident while he was cleaning his gun barrel. The villagers found it amusing. Who cleans a loaded gun? They laughed. But Fred was spared. He got lucky. The bullet passed through without causing significant harm. The local paramedic took care of everything, and there was no criminal intent involved. Whether by chance or not, Montgomery understood that he had an obligation to report it. But he felt sorry for Francine and Fred. Lusy volunteered to go and talk to Francine, believing that she could confide in her. It wasn't like talking to the police. Inside Francine's house, there were no lights on except for one dimly lit window, probably a desk lamp. Lusy knocked, but no one answered, so she entered. Francine was sitting in the kitchen, her eyes empty, gazing out the window. She had probably cried enough and didn't want to talk to anyone. Lusy approached her, called her name, but Francine didn't react. Lusy sat down next to her, put her arms around her shoulders, and gently stroked her head. They sat in silence. Suddenly, Francine leaned her head on Lusy's shoulder and said calmly, without tears, "I can't take it anymore, Lusy. I'd leave, but I'm afraid for him. He loves me. He knows everything, but he believes that if we don't talk about it, everything will be fine." "What about your Tomas?" Lusy asked. "What does he say?" "It's strange," Francine replied. "He says he loves me, but he doesn't insist on me leaving him. I think he's fine with the way things are. It's like déjà vu, manipulation, and submission," Lusy remarked. "Oscar in miniature. But it doesn't seem as deeply entrenched here. Francine is already having doubts. If we want her to leave Tomas, we'll need to be more subtle. But first, we need to find out what happened." Francine didn't believe that Fred, with his hunting experience, would accidentally mishandle his gun. "Why are you defending Fred so strongly?" Lusy asked. "He's a good person," Francine replied. "I regret that he got stuck with me. He could have been happy." "Then talk to him," Lusy suggested. "You know he loves you. You won't find anyone like him. But Tomas is not suitable for a family life. You know he won't forgive this." "Give it a try," Lusy insisted. Now it was time to talk to Fred. "Francine, may I visit Fred?" Lusy asked. "He doesn't want to talk to anyone," Francine replied. Fred lay in bed, pale with bruises under his eyes. He looked unfriendly and asked, "Who are you?" "I don't know you, and I don't want to." "Fred, could you tell me what happened?" Lusy implored. "Francine is trying to protect you, but she doesn't really know what happened. She's fighting so hard for you, Fred. You have a wonderful wife. Do you believe that?" Fred retorted. "The whole village knows this story." "Well, I thought Tomas took a girl away from you, but it turns out you took a girl from him," Lusy remarked. "It's your business if you want to compete, but you'll lose Francine. How will you live without her? Why do you think she didn't go to Tomas? She knows she's loved, and she knows where she's needed. If you can't control yourself, she'll leave. Not for Tomas, but from you." It seemed like Lusy had done everything right. Now, Francine and Fred would surely have a conversation. Maybe, just maybe, she had saved their marriage. But Montgomery hadn't helped in any way. What had happened remained a secret. "Well, Lusy, you're not much of a detective. All you can do is comfort," Montgomery teased. But Montgomery turned out to be a better detective. He discovered that Fred had never intended to commit something irreparable. He wanted to win his wife back. It was manipulation again. Even Lusy agreed that Fred could be forgiven. After all, it was out of love, she said. Spring arrived unexpectedly. Lusy hadn't ventured outside her house. She took orders from her clients and buried herself in work. Occasionally, Montgomery dropped by, and they engaged in idle conversation. Rose called and shared stories about her pregnancy. Francine also visited, boasting of her family happiness. As spring grew warmer, Lusy stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the fresh air and revel in the bright sun, green grass, and the first flowers. She felt that summer was just around the corner. One day, while taking a breather outside, Lusy noticed a woman standing on the road. The woman didn't say anything or ask any questions. She just stood there, gazing intently at the house. Lucy's heart pounded. She had a feeling she knew this woman. Lusy was hesitant to approach, but the woman turned her gaze toward Lusy and suddenly burst into tears. Lusy rushed to her side. "Mom!" Lusy cried out. Mary couldn't remember how she left the hospital or the injuries she had sustained. She didn't remember her home, her daughter, or her late husband. She had no recollection of where she had been or where she was going. Hunters had found her unconscious in the woods. There was a kind elderly lady's house nearby, and that's where they had brought her. The old woman had tended to Mary's broken bones. She couldn't understand how Mary had ended up in such a condition. Mary had no answers. She couldn't remember. The old lady's name was Clementine, and she had been living in the woods for 30 years. She was known as a healer and treated the residents of the nearby villages with her herbal remedies. She helped with sleeplessness, headaches, fractures, and insect bites. If Clementine realized that her remedies wouldn't work and the situation was serious, she advised people to see a doctor. Clementine gave Mary herbal concoctions and concocted strange-smelling ointments. Within a year, Mary was walking in the woods, collecting herbs, and even making trips to the city for groceries. She ended up staying in the forest and was unaware of where else to go. But Clementine didn't turn her away. A recent trip to the city market turned out to be fateful. The villagers supplied meat, fish, and eggs to Mary and Clementine. They grew their own vegetables, but had to make occasional trips to the city for staples. Mary was examining the goods, considering her purchases, when a heavily intoxicated woman approached her. "You, Mary." The woman swayed and slurred. She had gray, unkempt hair, a swollen face, and reeked of alcohol. "Who are you?" "I don't know you," Mary replied. "I'm Clara, your aunt." "Don't remember, do ya?" Clara was outraged, making a scene at the market. People were turning their heads to watch. "You're Clara." "I don't know you," Mary repeated. "Oh, you don't know me. But I know you. I raised your daughter, and you don't even recognize me," Clara ranted. Clara was causing a scene at the market, and they attracted attention. Lusy intervened, suggesting they step aside and talk. "Let's talk. I have something to say. There's a park nearby. Let's go there." While they walked from the market to the park, Clara became even more intoxicated. Mary was afraid she would fall or pass out, but Clara managed to say, "Get me some beer, and I'll tell you where your daughter is," before passing out. Mary rushed to buy the beer, revived Clara, and began questioning her about her identity and her family. Clara was in and out of consciousness. The conversation was long, and Mary learned a lot about herself. Clara had caused the death of her beloved husband in a cruel manner and had abandoned her own daughter. She had given her daughter away and disappeared, hoping to escape her past. She believed she could redeem herself by buying an apartment. Apartments aren't available anymore. "I raised your daughter, fed her, clothed her, and loved her as my own. And you ran away, leaving me, ran back to your own grandmother. But we tracked you down to Lake George. And I knew you had to come back someday. And I won't forgive you. No, I won't." Clara's passionate speech ended, and she passed out. However, Mary realized that her daughter was living with her grandmother in Lake George. She had not told Mary that her mother was either alive or dead. Mary gave Clara $10 and couldn't do anything more. Mary was deeply shaken. She had a daughter. What could have happened for a woman to forget her own child? She hadn't remembered, hadn't felt anything. Her daughter had grown up without her. Mary initially thought that she shouldn't go to her daughter. What good was a mother who had forgotten her? But the healer disagreed, saying that her daughter still didn't know where her mother was. She was missing in both life and death, so Mary visited. Her feet led her to the house. She stood there, gazing, and suddenly, a young woman stepped onto the porch. Mary didn't recognize her daughter but sensed who she was. Overwhelmed by emotions, she began to cry, and the young woman ran toward her, screaming, "Mom!" They recognized each other and stood hugging on the road, gazing into each other's eyes. Lusy saw her mother's familiar eyes on her aging face. Even though she didn't know anything yet, she was sure a woman with such a face couldn't have abandoned her, and something unfortunate must have happened to her. Mary was looking at her grown, beautiful daughter, overwhelmed by the realization that she didn't remember the little girl and would never experience the joy of watching her daughter grow. They both understood they would have to share their entire lives, lived separately from each other, and that the conversation would be long and heavy. They entered the house. Mary scrutinized the surroundings carefully, trying to recognize something, to at least feel like it was her home. But she couldn't. They spoke about minor things to avoid the main topic. They were both afraid to start the real conversation. Finally, Mary decided to tell her daughter everything as it happened. They talked for a long time, and Lusy tried to understand how to live without knowing anything about herself. She told her mother how they lived before the accident and how she had lived afterward, first with Clara, and then with her grandmother. Mary was interested in all of it. It was as if she was experiencing the life she could have had but had nothing to say about her own. Lusy cried with sorrow for her mother, and Mary wept for the life she never lived. She had had a happy life with a husband and a daughter. "Mom, will you stay with me?" Lusy asked. "No, Lusy, I'll go back to Clementine. She's all alone, and it's hard for her. She was the only family I had for so many years. I didn't know I had you. Now that I know, I'll come to see you. I won't lose you again." It was unclear how the news spread throughout the village, but everyone seemed to know that a strange woman had arrived at Lusy's. Some claimed she was her long-lost mother, Mary. They were all curious and wanted to know more. To find out, they sent Aunt Ashley to check. She was anxious, wondering if it was really Mary. Everyone thought she was long gone, practically gone to the other world. Where had she been all these years? What if it wasn't Mary at all, just an imposter? Aunt Ashley entered the house. At first, it was hard to make out who was sitting at the table. The woman turned around, and the neighbor froze. It was indeed Mary. "Oh, my God, Mary!" Ashley rushed to her. "Ashley, it's been so many years," Mary replied. "And Ashley, she doesn't remember anyone, not even me," Lusy said. "Mary, do you remember your husband, Michael?" Ashley asked. "And Ashley, she only knows what happened to her after the hospital. She didn't even realize why she had so many fractures. Please, tell everyone that Mom doesn't remember anyone. When they meet her, don't overwhelm her with questions." "Okay, I'll go." "Lusy, have you seen Montgomery?" "No. He didn't come by yesterday either." "Well, maybe he went to the city." As she left, Lusy hugged Mary once more. Lusy was getting nervous. Where could Montgomery have gone? "I was waiting for him yesterday, and he didn't show up. He's not here today either. When he went to the city, he would always ask if I needed anything. He should have been back from the city by now. What could be keeping him? Maybe he went to the neighboring village, but he should have returned by now." She couldn't help but worry. Something must have happened. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Lusy went outside to the porch, and there she found Monty lying by the door. She sat down on the steps and petted Monty. "Monty, do you know where your friend is? My mom has been found, but Montgomery is missing." The next day, the village was in turmoil. A police officer had disappeared, and it had been 3 days with no sign of him. It was discovered that the day before yesterday, he had been in the neighboring village, where some men had an argument and resorted to firearms, prompting them to call the police. Everything had ended well, and Montgomery had left, but he never returned home. The men decided to drive along the road between the villages, hoping to find some clue. Someone remembered there was a hunting cabin not far away and suggested checking it. It was unlikely anyone would be there, given that it wasn't hunting season. But they decided to explore everywhere. There was a dirt road leading to the cabin, though it didn't reach all the way to the cabin itself. They had to walk a couple of kilometers through the forest to reach it. At the point where they needed to turn off the road, they found Montgomery's car. It was immediately clear that something was wrong. The men rushed out of the car and ran towards the cabin. From a distance, they could see that the door was open and someone was lying on the porch. As they got closer, they discovered Montgomery unconscious, with a small pool of blood beneath him. Some called for an ambulance, while others shouted that they couldn't wait for it and needed to rush him to the hospital themselves. Nobody knew if he was even alive. They picked him up, laid him on a blanket, and quickly carried him back to the car. At the hospital, Montgomery was immediately taken into the operating room. Nobody left the hospital until they found out how the police officer was doing. About 2 hours later, a doctor emerged from the operating room and, in a tired voice, said, "He's going to be okay. You can go back to the village and let them know that your police officer will survive." The men started calling their families, telling them how they heroically rescued Montgomery and that he was out of danger. However, nobody thought to call Lusy, and she anxiously waited for their return. They had left during the day and hadn't come back yet. Fortunately, Francine realized and rushed to inform Mary. "Lusy, who is Montgomery? He's a police officer, Mom. He must be a very good police officer if our daughter has been so worried for 3 days." Lusy started getting ready to go to the city and the hospital, but Mary managed to stop her. "Why go at night? He's just out of surgery, and they won't let you into the ICU. You can go tomorrow morning." Yes, he must be more than just a police officer for Lusy to be this concerned. "Mom, promise me you won't leave. I want you to meet Montgomery. You've got me intrigued. If he's from high society, does that mean you two are in a serious relationship? We can't have a relationship. Have you heard the name Goldberry? Is it a well-known name? More than that, it's high society. I don't belong there." "Did Montgomery say that?" "No, Mom. We never talked about it. I think if a young man from high society is working as a police officer in a small village, he must have a strong mind of his own. He won't let anyone interfere in his personal life. Whoever he loves, he'll be with. I don't think he cares about social differences. This is just my judgment based on your stories. I'd like to meet him." In the morning, Lusy went to the city. At the hospital, they told her that Mr. Goldberry was feeling well, and he had been moved to a regular room. "You can go in, but don't bring him anything. And it's not recommended to talk to him about anything." Montgomery was pale but quite alert. When he saw Lusy, he even managed a faint smile. He couldn't eat, couldn't talk, so what could they do? Most of all, Lusy wanted to know what had happened. But she decided to wait and find out later. She felt so sorry for Montgomery. It was hard for her to hold back tears. He was lying there, pale, lonely, and miserable. Montgomery didn't know how pale he was, but he didn't feel miserable or lonely. While Lusy sat by Montgomery's side with a sad expression, back in the village, people were puzzled. Are they in a relationship? How did we overlook this? We need to save the girl. She doesn't understand who she got involved with. Maybe her mom will give her some guidance, although that's unlikely. Lusy visited Montgomery every day. He was recovering quickly, and there was hope he'd be discharged after a week. Finally, Lusy gathered the courage to ask, "Montgomery, what happened? How should I know? I went to the cabin, didn't even realize who was there. I was hit in the face right away, and then they stabbed me in the side. When I came to, there was no one around. I wanted to leave the house, but I lost consciousness. An investigator came by. He's a smart guy. He'll figure it out. Don't want to talk about it. Lusy, come on. I told you the whole truth. You're like a lie detector. I can't lie to you." "Well, if you don't want to talk, you don't have to. Did you call your parents?" "Why should I? Why should they get such news in Australia? They won't be able to come, and they'll just worry." They'll be here in a month. I'll be fine by then. But why are we talking about me so much? How about you? I've been keeping quiet for all I'm worth. My mom came to see me. Your mom. But you don't have a mom. I do. She's very much alive. She just lost her memory. She wanted to leave, but decided to wait for you. She wants to meet you. Oh, it's a sad story. I wanted to marry an orphan, and now her mom shows up. What was that just now? Is he not fully recovered? Is he delirious? How should I react? It sounded like a joke, but there were no such jokes before. Or maybe it's a hint. Well, then, make a proposal. Here's my hand and my heart. Lusy remained silent. She just couldn't think of what to say. She couldn't exactly shout, yes, yes, especially when no proposal had been made yet. Montgomery, I'm not ready to answer that right now. Great. I heard the most important part. For now, I'll wait. Lusy would have readily agreed if it were just about her and Montgomery, but he came from the famous Goldberry family, while she only had her mother, who had lost her memory. They were incomparable in terms of background. How long would Montgomery continue working as a village police officer? Probably not for long. It wasn't his lead. He would eventually return to New York, back to the familiar circles of the rich and famous. But what would Lusy do there? No, she couldn't go there. She wouldn't adapt or conform anymore. She had had enough. Lusy continued visiting Montgomery in the hospital, but tried to be cautious, avoiding unnecessary conversations. She decided on this approach. While she visited him in the hospital, once he recovered, they would part ways. Montgomery was puzzled. What had he said wrong? He could see that Lusy was distancing herself, but he didn't understand what was going on. When Montgomery returned to the village, he was welcomed as a hero, even though no one really understood what had happened. Montgomery joked, "The best investigators in the country are working on my case. They even brought in psychics. As soon as they find out anything, I'll let you know." Lusy behaved as if he hadn't made a proposal, calmly, politely, and distantly. She introduced him to her mother, saying, "My friend Montgomery, a local police officer, and nothing more. Just a friend and a police officer." This frustrated Montgomery. What's going on? He came to Lusy and asked, "Do you love me?" "It doesn't matter," she replied. "Tell me, how long are you going to play the role of a police officer here?" "Not for long." "Here's your answer. I won't go to New York with you. I don't want to be picked up. A destitute provincial who'll spend her entire life trying to meet high standards. I've tried that before, but I'm not asking you to come to New York. I want you to marry me." Lusy's thoughts got all jumbled up. Would he marry her and then shut her away at home while he lived his own life as he pleased? She'd had that experience before. Montgomery looked at her and smiled, while Lusy felt like crying. What kind of life was this? She had made a mistake again, another scoundrel in her life. Mary, who had been listening to the whole conversation, decided to step in. "Montgomery, I'm sorry, but I didn't understand. You don't plan on returning to New York?" "No, I don't plan to, especially because it seems to me that Lusy doesn't like New York." Lusy was stunned. Oh Lord, what a fool. They say one thing, and you hear another. But she did correctly hear that he decided to quit his job as a village police officer. Whether as a village cop or a second-rate musician from famous parents, what did he plan to do? "Montgomery, so you've decided to leave here, right? Where to? And what do you plan to do?" "I'm not asking out of curiosity. I've lived without my daughter for so long that now I want to be informed about everything happening in her life." At this point, Montgomery delivered a speech that was absolutely brilliant. He exuded enthusiasm, enough to captivate a large audience. But there were only two listeners, Lusy and Mary. Several years ago, after completing law school and briefly working in various places where his father had tried to place him, Montgomery decided that he would never work in either the prosecution or defense. He even thought he had made a wrong choice by going into law. It just wasn't interesting. What did spark his interest was when he met his college friend, Alex, who worked at a private detective agency. That's when Montgomery decided he would become a detective and open his own agency. He assessed his chances, believed he could do it, read numerous books, worked in 2 different agencies, and observed how things were done there. However, problems arose with his father, who became increasingly insistent on finding a more suitable career for his son. Montgomery had to flee to the village, but he never gave up on his dream of having his own detective agency. He considered his work as a police officer invaluable experience. Now Montgomery believed it was time to fulfill his dream. Even before going to the hospital, he obtained his license and completed all the necessary paperwork. The only thing left was the organizational aspects: finding a location, setting up an office, hiring employees. Montgomery was so convincing that Lusy immediately believed he would succeed. The only question remaining was where this agency would be located. You could rent a small office in the village, put up a sign that says private detective, and local women will come to you to track their husbands. You could sit in hiding to find out who's been cutting Aunt Jeevan's roses in her garden. They'll pay you with eggs, carrots, and potatoes. That's funny. Nobody in the village needs a detective. If you don't want New York, does that mean we're moving to the city, or are you not coming with me? What about your parents? They hope you'll return home. Lusy, I thought you understood what my parents are like. They love me very much, but they've accepted the fact that the boy has grown up and is arranging his own life. Now, Montgomery would disappear for a day or 2, then return and provide updates on how things were progressing. He found a location for the office, and his eyes would light up as he described it. Right in the city center, on the ground floor with direct street access, and the sign above the door would be clearly visible. The space was small, but it would serve as both a reception area and an office for employees with a panoramic window. He had also found employees, although Lusy had her doubts. She believed that a detective agency should be staffed with serious, mature individuals to maintain an air of respectability. Instead, there were 2 law school students with earphones in their ears and a peculiar computer genius. But Montgomery assured her that these were professionals, and he would provide the sense of respectability. Montgomery looked at Lusy cunningly and smiled. Lusy, I still need an experienced marketer. You know, handling pricing, advertising, press releases, interacting with the media. Do you know anyone suitable? Well, I need to think about it. There is a candidate, but she's quite capricious and independent, and she lives quite far, in the village. That's the right choice. Commuting from the village would be troublesome, and I'd have to rent an apartment. I'm just worried that my father will disapprove. He won't want his son living in a rental. He might start manipulating my health again. Lusy and Montgomery decided as follows. They would move and get married right away. Montgomery informed his parents and set a condition: no celebrity weddings and no media. His father shouted that it couldn't be that way, as he was a public figure, and people wouldn't understand. Surprisingly, his mother agreed and reminded her husband that it wasn't his wedding. Mary was planning to go back home to Clementine. She felt at peace. There was a sense of purpose in her life now. But her daughter was undergoing significant changes in her life, and she didn't need her mother's help. Mary missed the forest, the house, and the solitude. She had grown accustomed to living away from people. Montgomery entered and immediately announced, Lusy, you can start packing your things. I've rented an apartment. The office is ready, and the employees are prepared to start working. Tomorrow, they'll deliver the sign. We'll hang it up, and we can start working. You still haven't told me the agency's name. Something trendy and creative, or on the contrary, a classic of the genre. Like Dr. Watson or Goldberry & Co. Something like that. Come on, tell me. Lusy and the detective. What? You registered the name when I didn't know anything. You didn't invite me to work, and you didn't make an offer. You were just so sure I'd agree. Well, your confidence. I wasn't sure, but I hope. And if you hadn't agreed, the name would have reminded me that happiness was once possible. You know, the sadness of an unfulfilled dream isn't the worst feeling. Don't you like the name? I think it's cool. To be honest, Lusy really liked the name. What she especially liked was that Montgomery had decided to name the agency this way when they hadn't even exchanged words about love. While Lusy was preoccupied with her own insecurities about her imperfections and social disparities, he had already made all the decisions, and she portrayed herself as a principled fool. She had wasted so many nerves and so much time. It turns out, it's simple: trust your feelings, something Lusy had struggled to do. The experience of previous years had taught her that love often comes with a hefty and humiliating price. But Montgomery had no such experience. He had no doubts about his feelings and saw no reason to refuse happiness. Lusy and Montgomery packed their things. Everything Lusy brought with her could fit into 2 bags. She would leave with the same belongings she had arrived with. In contrast, Montgomery had a lot of luggage. There were large and small boxes, stacks of books, and clothes strewn about. The apartment he had rented was completely empty. They discussed which pieces of furniture they could take from Montgomery's home. No, Montgomery, we won't take this table. It's undoubtedly beautiful, but it's just too big, Lusy said. What about the bed? Montgomery asked. Are you kidding me? It would take up the entire room. I won't even mention the wardrobes. Yes, your furniture isn't suitable for a standard apartment, but we can take the small guest room sofa. It's compact and can be unfolded. Montgomery, what will happen to the house? Will you sell it? That's a shame. No, I really like the house myself. It will be our country residence. We'll come here on weekends and holidays. Your mother won't always be living in the forest with the herbalist. Maybe she'll want to come for the summer at least. She can babysit her grandchildren. Maybe even your famous grandparents will drop by. Rose will come with her child. So we won't be selling the house. A large truck arrived, and they loaded the furniture, boxes, and sat on the porch. It was both joyful and terrifying. What would this new life be like? But Lusy was concerned about a question from the past. Montgomery had never told her who had tried to kill him. She knew a trial had been set, so it meant the perpetrator had been found. But Montgomery brushed her off. It's not interesting. Why do you need to know? He replied. Montgomery, I have to know so that I don't imagine things that didn't happen. I don't want to go to the trial. Why do I need to hear in detail who was involved and how they hurt you? Yes, let's skip the trial. I'm afraid that if I tell you, you won't believe it. Try me. On that day, after dealing with the troublemakers, Montgomery was driving home. He received a call from an unknown number, and a man's voice said, Montgomery, come to the cabin. Something strange is happening here. Montgomery didn't recognize the caller's voice, but he drove there anyway. He approached the cabin, but nothing seemed unusual. 2 men were sitting on the porch, smoking. It didn't look like anything had happened. Montgomery introduced himself, asked what had occurred, but they said everything was fine. Is anyone else inside? Montgomery asked. Yes, there's someone inside sleeping. Montgomery went up the steps and saw a man sitting on the bed, but it was difficult to make out his face. The house was dimly lit. The man got up and approached, and suddenly Montgomery realized who it was. It was Lusy's ex-husband, Oscar, it seemed. Well, what do you think, cop? Did you think I'd give you Lusy? No, I'm not giving her up, ever. And you, the rich guy, decided to get in my way without thinking about who you were tangling with. Did Lusy not tell you who I am? I'm her husband, the owner. Wanted to run away, didn't she? No one can escape from me. Montgomery looked at him and tried to figure out what to do. Behind him stood 2 of Oscar's bodies. There was something sinister about Oscar, and a question arose. Was he insane, or did he just go mad recently? But Montgomery couldn't do anything. The 2 men rushed him, grabbing his arms. Oscar went to the table, grabbed a knife, and stabbed Montgomery in the side with a powerful thrust. Montgomery didn't immediately lose consciousness, but heard the two men hysterically scolding Oscar. "What have you done? I told you to scare him. We never agreed to murder. Let's get out of here." Then there was silence. Montgomery woke up in complete darkness, feeling around until he found the door and crawled out onto the porch. He passed out again from the excruciating pain, and he didn't know how long he had been unconscious. He woke up in the hospital, in the ICU. Lusy was sitting there, devastated. "It can't be. So, it's her fault. You see, I knew it. I shouldn't have told you. Your ex-husband is insane. He orchestrated all of this. But you did the right thing by running away from him. You chose the wrong man. It happens. But now you've gotten wiser. Look at me. I'm the ideal man. You won't find better. Well, it's all in the past." She's waiting. An empty apartment. "We need to go." They spent a couple of days settling in, and then Lusy became indignant. "You brought me here so that I could create a cozy atmosphere for you. Take me to the office immediately," she insisted. "As you wish, Lusy." The office had a dignified appearance. It was located in the city center, on a wide street, with a grand entrance featuring tall ornate doors. Flanking the entrance were large planters filled with blooming rose bushes and hydrangeas. Above all this splendor shone the sign Lusy and Detective. And in front of the entrance, on the sidewalk, stood the detective and his Lusy.